be singing 3 songs for you tonight, 4 actually. If you don't like that, you can stop us after the service.
No, if they don't like it, they can go.
There are 3 English songs, and 2 English songs, 1 French song, and 1 German song. And the English song, the first one, is by Arthur Somerville, a 19th century and turn-of-the-century composer, who loved setting the poems of A.E. Housman. How many of you have ever heard of Housman? Shropshire Lad, did you ever read those when you were a kid? Well, A.E. Housman lived in the late 19th century in England. I'm sorry to say that he was born in Worcestershire in a little town called Fockbury, and I'm not joking, only it was spelled F-O-C-K because they didn't know how to spell. And he never lived that down, actually. When people met him and said, "Where are you from?" he never wanted to say. Anyway, he became one of the great classical scholars of Great Britain. In fact, the single greatest Latin scholar that England had ever known. And in this, somebody else you probably know, J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings. Have you ever heard of that? Yes. Yes. Well, the 2 of them were great scholars, but on the side, Housman wrote poetry, and Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings. And the audience for the poetry and the audience for The Lord of the Rings was a very popular audience, entirely different from the audience of scholars who were important to them as classical readers of their work. Tolkien was a specialist in 8th century Anglo-Saxon poetry, and Housman was a specialist in 2nd century BC Latin and late Greek poetry. So, you know, they're not for every taste. Now, Housman had a very unhappy life. First of all, he was gay and was extraordinarily repressed. And he was frightened because of the Oscar Wilde trial and all kinds of things that were going on in the country. And he never let anybody know except his very, very closest friends, and of course his roommate, with whom he was in love. Now, his roommate was straight and moved when he got married, first to India, then to Canada. He obviously didn't know, he didn't know whether he wanted hot or cold, but he came back to Canada, never returned to England, and Housman was dismayed. Housman wrote letters to him throughout his life, and the other guy answered all the time. They remained good friends, but Housman still suffered all his life from this single, unreciprocated love, and his only out was to take occasional trips to Paris and Venice to satisfy his longings. But he lived as a recluse, and he was a very sarcastic man. He couldn't put up with bad scholarship because his scholarship was so good. Nevertheless, in 1879, he wrote 63 short poems called A Shropshire Lad. The thing about them is that their major themes are murder, death, disease, and dying young. So it's really, you know, not for everybody. However, the extraordinary thing is that when World War I hit, and young men went to the war and died, or came back handicapped, or demented, in any way destroyed, the book shot up in sales. It became extraordinarily popular because it spoke to the audience of everything that they had lost. Now, among the 63 poems, there are 2 or 3 that are not that morose. We're going to sing one of the happy ones to you.
Yay.
Yay. This one is called Loveliest of Trees, the Cherry. And I'd like to read it to you and then explain it briefly. Loveliest of trees, the cherry now is hung with bloom along the bough, and stands about the woodland ride, wearing white for Eastertide. It's a good day for that. Now, of my 80 years and 10, that's 70, by the way, 80 and 10, it's the biblical, typical age of a human being. Now, of my 80 years and 10, 20 will not come again. That is, he's 20 years old now. And take from 70 springs a score, take from 70, 20, because I'm 20 now and I'll only live to be 70, it only leaves 50 more. And since to look at things in bloom, 50 springs are little room, about the woodlands I will go to see the cherry hung with snow. Now, he goes out in the morning to see the cherry blossoms because it's spring and Easter time. But he'll come back in the winter to look at the cherry when their blossoms really are clusters of snowflakes, just as beautiful and yet reminiscent of his inevitable aging, because they are cold and they are icy and the blooms are dead. So in a way, there's a slight melancholy to this song, even though it's an assertion that I love nature. It is beautiful. I will go out to look at it in any season. And we'll sing it for you now. The next song is by a poet named Edmund Waller. He lived in the first third of the 17th century, and he was a bastard. He had planned the assassination of King Charles I with two friends. Then he snitched on them. They were executed. He confessed, got off scot-free. Charles was killed anyway, but not by him. And of course, Oliver Cromwell came in as the Lord Protector of the realm at that point. And so, being the kind of guy he was, Edmund Waller wrote a beautiful poem to Oliver Cromwell that everyone said was really great poetry. And Waller was pardoned for having been pardoned by Charles I. However, he bribed people to get where he was, to get jobs. He stole money from friends. He was just a real awful person. And when Oliver Cromwell...
like first
I'm sorry?
First incarnation of Berlusconi. You just write home. The first incarnation of Berlusconi, our Italian guy, politician.
I'm sorry. I didn't hear.
It's like the incarnation of Silvio Berlusconi.
Oh.
Like I think you took after.
An incarnation, yes, definitely.
Yeah, great.
I'm sorry, I'm wearing my music hearing aids, so I don't just hear. That's true. Anyway, Waller wrote a poem that I thought was really fascinating. It's called Go Lovely Rose. Now that sounds pretty sentimental, and I'm sure many of the men in this audience have brought flowers to their girlfriends and wives. This guy does too, but when you give those flowers, you give them with love and affection. Listen to this poem. Go, lovely rose, tell her that wastes her time and me. And by the way, that doesn't mean tell her that wastes her time and mine. It's that she wastes her time and she wastes him. He's wasting away from how she's treated, okay? Tell her that wastes her time and me, that now she knows when I resemble her to thee, that is, when I compare her to thee, how sweet and fair she seems to be. When she looks at this rose, she'll understand that I compare her to this rose, and I think that she is as beautiful as this rose. So far, so good. Tell her that's young and shuns to have her graces spied. She's very standoffish. She doesn't like to go out in public. She doesn't like to show her beauty. Tell her that's young and shuns to have her graces spied. That hadst thou sprung in deserts, he's speaking to the rose now, hadst thou sprung in deserts where no men abide, thou must have uncommended died. If you're growing in a desert, nobody's going to know about how beautiful you are. Small is that worth of beauty from the light retired. Bid her come forth. Suffer herself to be desired, and not blush so to be admired. Come out, show yourself, let yourself be desired. You are beautiful. But now get this, and she's still talking to the rose. Then, after you've done this, die, that she, the common fate of all things rare, may read in thee how small a part of time they share, that art so wondrous sweet and fair. Life is short, dear rose. Tell her that no matter how beautiful you are and how much I compare her to you, you can die too, and you will die, and she will die. So she had better come out from her little virtuous cocoon before it's too late. The next song is a French poem called Lydia by Fauré, and it was written in about 1870s, I'm not quite sure. The interesting thing about this poem is that the words themselves are by a poet named Le Comte de Lille, who was a member of a group called the Parnassians. And their thing was to write poetry that was anti-romantic. They were tired of the whole romantic period that preceded them. They wrote poetry that had a purity and a simplicity and a classicism about it that was absolutely opposite to the self-indulgent expressionism of the mid-century romantics. And the reason why this music is the way it is because of the name of the poem. The name of the poem, Lydia, is the name of the girl to whom the poem is addressed. And Fauré knew that in the old days, and we're talking really centuries before, music was written in modes, not in scales. Even Plato knew about the modes, and he thought that certain modes were proper for war and soldiery, and other modes were proper for love. And the mode that Fauré chose for this poem was the Lydian mode. It was called the Lydian mode, and he chose it because the girl's name is Lydia. Now, the Lydian mode sounds a little weird. I'm going to play an E-flat major scale for you, very simply. But in the Lydian mode, it sounds like this. That's the strange part. And you'll hear it in the harmonies of this poem. The words of the poem in English are as follows. I have musical hearing aids and I have music reading glasses. Lydia, upon your pink cheeks and upon your neck so cool and so white, there roll down glittering the fluid golden hair that you untie. The day that is shining is the best. Let us forget the eternal grave. That's very, very opposite of the former poet who said, remember the grave, my dear, it's time for you to come out. Let us forget the eternal grave. Let your dove-like kisses sing upon your flowering lips. A hidden lily unceasingly spreads a divine scene in your breasts. I'm sorry, not scene, but scent. That's the fault of my eyes. Delights like a swarm emanate from you, young goddess. I love you and die, oh my love. My soul is ravished from me in kisses. Oh Lydia, Lydia, restore my life to me. May I die forever. Now please don't take him literally, because the word die, ever since the Renaissance, was a euphemism for orgasm. And you have to know that. And when you read love poetry of John Donne, for example, or Philip Sidney, or Le Comte de Lille, please remember, 9 times out of 10, whenever you see the word die, that's what it means.
Caché, les pensons